In this video, we're going to cover Express RESTful routing on a user's resource. Basically, if you look at these two tables here, we're going to build out all of these into our app. So we're going to have a /users route that accepts GET and POST requests, a /users user ID route, which is going to have GET, patch, or delete methods, and then two routes for rendering forms for a new user and editing a current user. I've already started setting up some of the boilerplate for these apps here, and I'll just talk about what's going on here first. But if you want to get to this point, there are instructions on the curriculum page. And you can also see the link to GitHub at the bottom, which will give you the source code for this exercise. All right. So at the top of this file, I just have my npm packages, which are our dependencies. We have body parser for URL encoding our forms, Express, which is the basis of our app, obviously. And we have method override, which is a specific handler for forms in order to override the default HTTP verbs that you get with forms, which are post and get requests. This is going to basically enable our forms to submit patch and delete requests instead of post and get. And it does it using a query string. But we'll get into that more when I show you the actual templates. We're also going to be not using a real database for this exercise. So I have users is just an array, and then ID is the latest user ID, basically, which is defaulting to 1. This will become clear how this works when we start implementing the other routes. Our view engine is going to be Pug for templating, and method override is just middleware that gets past this underscore method parameter, and I'll show you what that does in a bit. Then we have the get for the /, which is the root route, and that one essentially just redirects to /users, which is our true root, rendering the index and a users object with the user's key here. This is ES6 shorthand for users, by the way. At the bottom, we're just listening on port 3000. This is arrow function syntax, by the way. It's directly equivalent to doing this kind of thing. It's just a little bit more concise, and you'll see this more because it came out with ES6. So it's kind of the new way to do things. All right, let's go look at some templates. As always, we have our base template, which is just HTML boilerplate. Nothing interesting is really going on here. The point is that this is extendable for all of our other Pug templates. We have the show template, which is for a specific user when you route to /users/ID. And this will just display an h1 with the user.name. Our user object is going to be really simple, and it's just going to have a name and an ID attribute. To create a new user, we just have a form here with 2 inputs. There's a text input and a submit button, and then it does a post request to /users when you click submit. Our index page is our landing page for the app. So what we will have here is an h1 to see all users, and then a link immediately to create a new user. And this will take you to the template for our new user form. Then we have an unordered list that for each user in users, which we will have to pass to it. I can show you right here in the rest.render, we're passing a user's object with an array to the index. So this is just Pug's way of iterating through that. For each user, it's going to render a list item with the user's name, This is just a new line character, basically. And then on the next line, we'll have a link to edit the specific user, and this will render the edit template. By the way, this is ES6 string interpolation / template literals. It's really awesome. It's used all over the place in Pug, but the point is that you have to put backticks and then $ brackets for a variable. Our edit template is probably the most interesting. It has two forms here. The second form is the simpler one to talk about. It's just a button, a submit button that has an X on it, and it just deletes a user. The first one has text to change the username, and the default value is the current user's name, which will get passed through as a parameter. The interesting thing about the edit page is that we're doing method overriding for both of these forms here. So even though the actual method is post for these forms, we're adding a special query key which triggers the method override middleware. So what that will say is this request now, which was originally a post request, will map to a route handler in Express for a patch or a delete, depending on what the method was overridden to. So the reason that we have to do this again is because forms in HTML spec only submit post or get requests. So this is kind of a hack in order to get the actual RESTful routing methods that are required by RESTful conventions, basically. Cool. So let's actually build out the rest of our app, and it might be obvious how it functions. By the way, I'm already running this app. Here's what it looks like right now. There's basically no users in the array, so it's not rendering anything here. And when I click create a new user, we haven't implemented that route yet in Express, so we'll have to do that to not get the default 404. So let's start with that, actually. So here we're just going to do a get request for /users/new. And it's going to have a handler callback. And really simply, we're just going to render the new template. And this one doesn't take any parameters. It's just a simple form. There's no string interpolation or anything going on here. If I check in the browser, it's working. And it is posting to the correct spot /users, but we haven't implemented a route handler for that yet. So that'll be the next thing we do. So in this case, we'll do app.post/users with a request and a response. And here we have to add a new user to our user array. So the user object I will define by saying const user equals ID. So I'm going to be taking the latest ID, which is default to 1. And then I'm going to use the object spread operator to get the body of the post request. This syntax might trip you up if you've never seen it before, but it is part of Node now. I don't know if it's become a standard in JavaScript, but it definitely will, probably in ES 2018 or 19. But essentially what this says is take all of the keys from the request.body object and spread them out into this new object user. The old way to do this, which you might see in a lot of existing Node code, is object.assign object, an ID object, and then request.body. And what this does is merges the second and third and fourth, however many parameters you want, into the first parameter so that it squishes everything into one object. So it's a lot more verbose, and once you learn what the ... means, you'll probably never want to use this again. Cool. So all we have to do is push the user into the users array, and then by convention, what we're going to do is redirect back to the /users route. And the reason for that is basically when you submit the form, you just want to go back and see the thing that you've submitted in the list of other things. All right, let's try and see if it actually works. So I'll refresh this and I'll enter my GitHub username. Cool. And we got redirected back to the index page, and it added computer to the list that it's rendering. And now it's rendering also the edit user, which is great. So even though we haven't implemented edit yet, you can actually see that it's interpolating the ID correctly, which is great. Let's do that now. So we can app.get /users/ID, and it's a variable, and then edit. And all we have to do is render the edit page. But that's actually not all we have to do, because we have to pass it something. Otherwise, it won't know where to get its values from. So here's, it's expecting user.name and user.id. And if we don't pass it user, it won't be able to render that properly. So first we have to find the actual user. So to find our user, we'll reference the users array, and we'll do a .find method. And usually the parameter is called v. Doesn't really matter why, but it could be anything. We'll just say find v, where v.id equals the number of the request params.id. So request.params.id is this, but it will come in as a string, so we have to cast it to a number. And this will just search the array until it finds an ID that matches the ID from the route. And then we'll render that user. A little tricky, but it should make sense to you if you've been following along. The other thing, don't get caught up in this, but I have a font that uses ligatures. So your equals arrow and your triple equals might look different if you're not using that. Cool. So you can see if we refresh, the users go away. This is the downside of not using a database, because we're basically storing everything in local memory. But it's still going to work for this example. Let's just try adding it again. When I click edit user, now it brings me to the user/ID/edit route, which is the form, which is pre-populated with the actual user. So neither of these buttons are going to work because we haven't implemented a patch or delete handler, but we can do that right now. app.patch/users/ID, and then request response. For this one, we're actually going to have to modify the array. So first thing we're going to have to do is find the user that we're trying to modify. So we can copy and paste the same find method that we did before. Then we're going to want to change the user.name to equal the request.body.name. So the thing that came in through the form, you can see here that we're going to be submitting a patch with a value of, it's going to have a payload with a name key, and the value of that is going to be whatever we change it to. Afterwards, we'll just redirect back to /users again. And while we're here, we might as well do the delete method as well. I'm going to copy and paste to make it simpler. And when you send a delete request to user's ID, instead of find, we can just do a array.filter. Actually, we won't be able to do this because our users is a constant, so I guess we don't want to override the user's array. It'll probably be easiest to just pop the user off the array. And the way that we can do that is with the splice. So let's do this kind of method. So we'll have user index equals users.findIndex. FindIndex is a variation of find, which returns the index of the element we're looking for, as you can see from this docstring. So in this case, v equals v.id. We want to match it to the request.params.id as a number. And then once we get the index of the user to remove, we can call users.splice user index, and we will delete one item from it. And then we'll redirect back to users. So together, the patch and the delete should work. Let's see if I change my last name to Hute. And it's set property name of undefined. Possible that the form that the user is actually gone now. Let's just go back to the beginning again. Edit. Hute. There we go. So the reason that that server crash happened before is because we're using an array for our database. And when the server restarted based on my changes, it removed the array from the actual database because it's garbage, basically. But anyway, I can also test the delete method here, which works. It sent a delete request, which was handled by the route handler, and removed it from the list. Then the list re-rendered. Let's just do a couple more examples here. Ellie. Matt has a ridiculous GitHub username, and we can delete. Ah, interesting. So did you see what happened there? When I clicked on Matt, it took me to Ellie. Interesting. So something must be happening with our ID. Okay, so in the users, when we create a new user, we need to remember to increment our ID. Otherwise, everyone's going to end up having the same ID, and it's just going to pull the first one it finds. So we can refresh the server, which clears our fake database again. Do Ellie. And I'll just do me again. And here we go. Cool. So now it's users too. So the ID incremented successfully. And delete Ellie. And when I create a new user, they should have a different ID. And it's 3. And I can change his name. Cool. All right, so this is pretty much a brief intro. And in an actual app, as you'll see in later curriculum lessons, you'll want to split out all of this logic so that it's not one huge app.js file. And obviously you'll want to use a real database instead of an array in memory. But this should be sufficient to just give you an overview of RESTful routing. And if you want to see the completed app code, I believe the app code uses instructors as an example, but you can see that on GitHub. Thanks.